Well, I certainly loved listening to my friend Catherine, and I think her book is a tremendously important addition, contribution to the world of parenting, and not just parenting, to the extraordinary period we're living in right now of epical change. Probably not since Gutenberg invented the printing press has technology changed everyday life as profoundly, minute to minute, second to second, as we're seeing today. And when you're in the midst of such profound change, it's hard to take stock and see what's going on. And I think Catherine has done that beautifully in her wonderful, wonderful book. What I'm here to talk to you about is the small, insignificant question, what should you do to raise kids the right way? So, let me just find out again, how many of you have kids under the age of 5? Okay, and how many of you have kids between the ages of 5 and 10? And how many of you have kids between the ages of 10 and 15? And how about over 15? Okay, so we have you pretty well situated. I'm going to take this off. I'm not attached to anything, am I? Just so you know where I fit in that category, my wife and I have a daughter named Lucy, who's 24, lives in this city. I have an office on West 72nd Street, and I stay with her when I come down, which is quite wonderful. She works at McGarry Bowen, an ad agency. And then I have a son, Jack, who's 21, and he's a junior at Elon in North Carolina. He wants to be an entrepreneur. And my youngest, Tucker, is in the 12th grade, still lives at home for the last few precious months. And he's going off to Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. It's a cliche, but it truly does seem like yesterday that they were born. And I really urge you to savor these moments. I know it's a cliche, carpe diem, so on and so forth, but please just revel. And I know, how do you revel when you're changing diapers and getting up in the middle of the night and being pulled all different directions, but take the time to savor the moments. It is the most wonderful thing any of us ever does, is raise a child. And my life changed more dramatically than it has ever changed before, with the possible exception of the day I was born. It changed more dramatically than it has ever changed before or ever will. On July 16th, 1989, when Sue gave birth to Lucy. And I remember, as if it were yesterday, bringing her home from the hospital and laying her down on our bed. We lived in Cambridge at the time, just outside of Boston. And we started to change her diaper, and she started to pee. And my wife, Sue, started to cry. And I thought, is this some sympathetic response to peeing, and I said, what's the matter? And she said, I have no idea how to be a mother. And later that day, for dinner, I went out to the local Indian restaurant, and we'd fallen in love with Indian food during her pregnancy. We still love it. And I'd gotten some Indian food, brought it home, laid it out on the kitchen table. We sat down. I started to eat. Sue was nursing Lucy. She starts to cry again. I say, what's wrong now? And she says, I'm really hungry and I don't know how to nurse and eat at the same time. So I start feeding her, and it was emblematic of how inept we were. We really, and here I was, a Harvard-trained child psychiatrist. I had no clue how to raise a child, and as for a game plan, all my training had turned me into an expert in misery. I knew all the things that could go wrong. I knew everything, every chapter and verse and footnotes. But give me a little peeing and pooping machine, and with the instruction, turn this child, this infant, into the person you hope she can become, I didn't have a plan. I did not, it was not part of my training and not part of it. I didn't know what to do. Here we are with this little baby, no plan. And if I didn't have a plan with all the training I'd received, nobody else did. And so I said to myself, my gosh, I've got to come up with a plan. And it was a good time to sort of be researching, what actually does work. What do kids really need? A lot of research was coming, and still is, in terms of what actually does predict who will turn out to be the way we want our kids to turn out to be. And by the way, if I polled you all, if I said, what do you want for your children? It's a great question. Ask yourself, what do I want for my children? And if I went around the room and we'd get answers that were almost identical. First word out of your mouth would be the word happy. I want them to grow up to be happy. And then you'd say successful, healthy, contribute to the world, fulfilled, find a good mate, have children if you want to. You Jewish mothers, of course, expect that. I expect it too, and I'm a goy, so I'm actually an Episcopalian. I try to fit that in, I'm one of the few psychiatrists you can find who has no facial hair, is not Jewish, and believes in God. It's a minority group that. But you'd have the same answers. It would all be, we all want the same for our kids. We want them to grow up to be, cool and love life and contribute and avoid trouble. So, but then if I said to you, how do you get them there? What do you do? Very few of you would have a coherent answer to that question, which I submit is one of the most important questions a human being can ask, particularly if you're going to have a child. But we don't. We don't have an agreed upon game plan. And so what happens is parents like you all embarking on the greatest adventure anyone ever embarks upon, you're flying by the seat of your pants. And what you usually do is cobble together some combination of what happened to you growing up with what others in your peer group are doing. That becomes your de facto game plan. It's usually not examined, certainly not submitted to rational sort of criticism and discussion. And you just kind of do it. Day after day, you're kind of just doing it. Well, I knew I didn't want to replicate my own childhood. I mean, God bless them. But I come from an old New England WASP family. Hallowell, you can find a Hallowell Gate at Harvard. You can find a Hallowell Hall. Old New England WASP family, characterized by what I call the WASP triad, which is alcoholism, mental illness, and politeness. They were wonderfully interesting people, my family, but they were on any given day usually drunk, crazy, or both. And so they were interesting and loving. They just weren't really into the task of providing for a child. We were produced because that's what you did, but then it was sort of catch as catch can. And so I didn't want to replicate that as much as I love them. Most of them are in heaven now. And then as I looked at my peer group, the others, that I came up with, I saw that they were all following what I call the pyramid model. Now, the pyramid model rests on the completely unexamined assumption that those kids will do best in life, and we've already agreed that we all want the same outcome for our kids. Happy, wonderful, successful, go down the list. The pyramid model says that those kids will do best in life who do best each step of the way. And so, without thinking about it, following the pyramid model, you play Mozart in utero. Parents are doing that. Oh, this is good. They'll get the sensorium a running start, Get that Mozart in there, and I'm in, and we'll meditate over them, and we'll beam them good vibes in this little. Can't get started too soon, and then the baby gets born. Okay, now we got to find the best, and who knows who rates these things, but there's a market, so there is a rater. The best nanny, the best daycare, the best, and there is a boot camp, so-called, in this city where you can get your infant potty trained by the age of 6 months, thereby increasing his or her chances of getting into the best daycare, nursery school. And they had me on Good Morning America to talk about this, and I said, this is child abuse. Not only is it not necessary, it's actively bad. But again, unexamined, good parents, and you all coming here, you wouldn't give up a morning to come listen to a bunch of strangers talk to you if you weren't good parents. If you weren't self-selected as parents who love their kids and want the best for their kids. And you are the ones who are most apt to fall for these crazy pitches. Well, if you want your child to do well, get him potty trained at 6 months. Okay, I'll do that then, because there's no, you don't know where to turn. And believe me, as they get a little bit older, there's a tutoring agency in this city that has mastered the curricula of the private schools in Manhattan. So Dalton, Collegiate, you name it. And so let's say your son or daughter is only getting a B+ in European history in 10th grade. You can get a tutor who knows that teacher, knows that school, knows the exams, to pretty much guarantee that kid will get an A, thereby increasing his or her chances of getting into heaven, otherwise known as Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. And guess what the hourly fee for that tutor is? Just make a wild guess. $1,500, $1,500 per hour, not per semester, per hour. There's a waiting list around the block. It was started by a Wall Street lawyer who saw an opportunity, and now he's making a lot more money than he was on Wall Street. A completely unnecessary, and I would say actively damaging service rooted in parents' love, fear, and ignorance. By the way, I'm not opposed to tutoring, and it's become sort of an essential, particularly in SAT prep. And when you get to that stage, there's a wonderful agency in New York called Inspirica that also in Boston and Philadelphia that does it really, really well. So I'm not opposed to the notion of helping kids prepare for the realities of the world, but just pick and choose wisely. Pick and choose wisely. So if it were the case that being at the top of the pyramid maximize the chances that your kid will live the life we all want our kids to live, then sure, go for it. But it's simply not true. And it's this fool's gold, this golden calf that people are worshiping at the expense of childhood, at the expense of what kids actually do need. Because guess what? There's no correlation between the prestige of the college you attend, your SAT scores, your grade point, whether you are toilet trained by 6 months or 4 years. There's no correlation between that and what kind of life you do lead. And yet people behave as if there were a one-to-one correspondence. If you're number one in your class, you'll be number one at age 40. Wrong! Just let me set you free of that, because in this city particularly, people take that as holy grail. Well, of course it's true. Number one at collegiate is going to be the happiest person in the world. Wrong! Not so! And that's really good news. Because some of the happiest people you know, some of the most successful people you know, struggled in high school. Maybe didn't even graduate from college. One of my friends, the man who founded JetBlue Airlines, dropped out of college. And he's one of the most happy, successful men I've ever known. He founded JetBlue, got tired of that, now he's founding another airline in Brazil. And I could fill this room with people who weren't anywhere near number one. Now, I'm not saying it's bad to be number one, that's fine. But that's not what tells the story. So what does tell the story? And let me tell you this, because this is such freeing and important truth for you to have. It's the attitudes you develop growing up. Attitudes like confidence, grit, the ability to bounce back, optimism, the ability to connect with other people, empathy, which Catherine mentioned. These attitudes, everyone can acquire. Every child, independent of IQ, independent of family income, independent of any other variable, every single child can develop the attitudes that maximize the chances that he or she will live the life we all pray to God our children will live. That's really good news. What's sad is that so many people either don't know it or don't believe it, and therefore don't act upon it. So how do you instill these attitudes that will carry your child? A love of life, an exuberance, a curiosity, an ability to take risks. Attitudes like my daughter summed it up when 9/11 happened. My daughter Lucy was like 13, and I was asked to go on TV and advise parents as to how to handle it with their kids. And I asked Lucy, I said, what should I say? And she said, tell parents to make sure, after this terrible event, that their kids don't hold back on life out of fear. Oh, what great advice that is. Raise your kids so they're not holding back on life out of fear. In my opinion, the only learning disability, and I have both ADD and dyslexia myself, I wouldn't trade them for the world. I think people who don't have ADD have attention surplus disorder, you know. That's another lecture. I see ADD as a gift that's hard to unwrap. And I tell people I don't treat disabilities, I help people unwrap their gifts. And that shift, I think, makes all the difference. But the real disability, what really holds people back in life, is fear and shame and believing that you're stupid or that you can't do it. And this has been proven. See, that's what's so good. We have hard data about this. Carol Dweck spent a lifetime proving that what she calls a growth mindset predicts success, whereas a fixed mindset holds you back. A fixed mindset says, what I can do is limited by my IQ, my family's income, my race, my gender, what have you, my height. And a growth mindset says, there's no limit. I can acquire whatever help I need to achieve my goals, whatever they might be. And guess what? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like that old saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Well, that's true. That's true. And there's hard data so make sure you raise your kids believing they can. Because the more they believe they can, the more they'll do. And it's like magic. Belief in possibility leads to the achievement of what had seemed impossible. How then do you instill these attitudes? Well, I'll give you a plan, and I just need to see how many minutes I've got to give you this message that will set you free. Because it really will set you free from the tyranny of there are people out there just wanting to scare you. You have to understand, fear sells. Fear really sells. And there are people out there just trying to scare parents into buying things they don't need and signing on for services that they don't need and just feeling kind of sad and worried about the future. If you're sitting in this room right now, if you're able to come to this event today, you've got it made. Your kids have got it made. There are kids who don't have it made. Your kids have it made. As long as you follow the plan that I'm about to give you. which is rooted in evidence, not in philosophy or homespun wisdom. Although there's a great congruence, as it turns out, between a lot of homespun wisdom and what actually does work. Okay, 5 steps to how to instill these attitudes: the growth mindset, confidence, optimism, the ability to connect, empathy, love of life, self-regard, all of those that everybody can acquire. Step number 1 is to connect. Step number 2 is to play. Step number 3 is to practice and work. Step number 4 is to make progress, achieve some degree of mastery. Step number 5 is to receive recognition, which in turn connects you to the folks recognizing you, thus completing the cycle, what I call the cycle of excellence. And if you enter your child into that cycle from day 1 or from day -9 or whenever you want to, from the moment of conception, you say, oh boy, that was great, now we'll start connecting. It'll work. Step 1 is by far the most important: the power of connection. There is no force in life that produces more bounty, more growth, more wonderfulness than the force of connection. I call it the other vitamin C, vitamin connect. Sad thing is, as Catherine pointed out, we're living in a world suffering from a deficiency of vitamin connect. We're hyper-connected electronically. But paradoxically, as we've connected electronically, we've been disconnecting interpersonally. The electronic moment is crowding out the human moment. And there's just, as Catherine said, there's just so much more comes through in the human moment. You want to see the difference? Imagine the difference between kissing a photograph and kissing a person. You know, you can just feel how much more you get in person, unless you really love that photograph. But so the power of connection is really the driving force. The greatest gift you can give a child is a connected childhood, and by that I don't mean access to the internet. I mean this to raise a child in this force field of positive energy, of positive connection. And guess what? You can create that. It's largely free. The beauty of connection is it's free and it's infinite in supply. The sad part is people don't take it seriously enough. Now, you get a running start the minute you become a parent. The minute you become a parent, as I became on July 16th, 1989, or the minute you adopt your first child, the minute you become a parent for the first time, you change forever. You are never the same person again. You enter into a permanent state of psychosis. You go crazy. You fall madly, insanely in love in a way you never thought possible. You discover a whole altruistic side of you that you just never had experienced before, where you become not only willing but eager to do things you have to be crazy to do. To get up in the middle of the night over and over and over, to plunge your hands into poop, you know, to in airports and supermarkets totally give up your dignity. You know, you become a crazy person. And we parents, we are crazy. And it's a darn good thing we are. And as you're doing it, you say, this is so much fun, I think I'll do it again. My wife and I did it 3 times. You know, and some do it even more, many more times. It's really the driving force of civilization, of growth. That force of connection between a parent and a child, I think, is the single strongest emotion in all of human existence. If you look at the great literature, I went to see the other night King Lear at the Brooklyn Academy of Music with Frank Langella. It's all about relationship between parent and child. It is the central drama of human existence. if you take that seriously, if you honor it and nourish it and feed it and treat it as the incredible force for good that it can be in life, then it will be that. Don't trivialize it. People in my profession, we talk about supplements and tutors and all this kind of stuff. We don't talk nearly enough about love. Love is what you're giving every day. And thank God, it works. Over time, nothing changes a person more dramatically for the better than love. And nothing makes a person wither more sadly than the absence of love. So bathe your child in connection, in love, day in and day out, and that's really what you need to do. How do you create a connected family? Spend time together. It's that simple. Spend time together. Read aloud at bedtime. Go on picnics. Have family dinner without electronic devices. My first rule of parenting, have fun with your children. If you have fun with your kids, it's almost for sure you're doing it right. Unless you're just smoking pot with them all day. And who knows, I don't know if there are any studies on that. Maybe that works too. But, but you see, it ought to be fun for you. And that's why I get annoyed with all these, books and whatnot about how hard it is and what an ordeal it is. They really make it so, who in the world would want to do that? There's nothing in my life that even comes close to the fun I've had with my kids. Have there been hard times? Sure. But nothing compares to the fun. And we still do have fun together. I mean, there's nothing I'd rather do than spend time with my kids. Nothing. And you ought to embrace it like that. Think of being a parent as the most fun thing you'll ever do. There's a new book out called All Joy and No Fun. And, this woman wrote, it's a very good book, but I take issue with it. It ought to be fun. If you do it right, it can and should be fun. Is there a hard part? Sure, there's a hard part. But there's a hard part to a lot of things that are fun. So get out of this notion that it's got to be taxing and draining and difficult and blah, 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 and just embrace it and go for it with just enthusiasm and pizzazz. So connection at home. And by the way, if you fight a lot in your family, don't think you're disconnected. You're just passionate. The opposite of connection is not conflict. The opposite of connection is indifference. So if you're just by nature a spirited, passionate family and you're arguing about everything under the sun, good. You care. Just try to minimize the bloodshed, but that's fine. Connection and conflict go hand in hand. You can't have intimate relationships without conflict. It's impossible. So that's absolutely fine. So what else goes into a connected childhood? Well, connection to your neighborhood, the family you choose. A lot of people these days don't even know their neighbors. They don't know them well enough to ask them to pick up the mail. They've got a huge cyber neighborhood, but they don't know the human beings that live next to them. Don't let that happen to you. Connection to friends, friends are so important. Yeats had a great line. He said, think where man's glory most begins and ends, and say, my glory was I had such friends. Cherish, nourish your friends. Most of you are women. Women do this much better than men. Make your friends matter. Make them real. Tell them the truth. And then if you're a child, connection to school. Now, what do I mean by connection to school? And this includes connection to nursery school and preschool and nanny and all that. It doesn't refer to the grades you're getting. It refers to how you feel when you walk in the door. Do you feel safe? Do you feel welcomed? Do you have somebody you're looking forward to seeing? and something you're looking forward to doing, even if it's just lunch or recess. Or if you answer yes, that means you're connected. Now, for some kids, that comes easily. But for other kids, it's not so easy for a whole host of reasons. I'll give you an example. Myself, I started school in 1955. I'm 64 years old. You're all supposed to say you don't look it. So I start in 1955 in a little town on Cape Cod called Chatham, on the elbow. Any of you ever been to Chatham? Well, back then in 1955, Chatham was just a sleepy little fishing village. In fact, we used to call it a drinking town with a fishing problem. And it was in no way a hotbed of intellectual activity. It was quite the opposite. So here I am, I show up, first grade, I'm supposed to learn how to read. I can't do it. The other kids are getting it. We're sitting at these little round tables, taking turns reading out loud, See, Spot, Run, remember those books? Comes to be my turn, I stammer, I stutter, I can't do it. September, October, November, and little Ned's not getting it. Well, back then in the 50s in Chatham and really most places, they didn't have people like me. They didn't have learning specialists. If you were a little boy or a little girl who couldn't learn to read, your diagnosis was obvious. Stupid, you know. And the treatment plan was try harder. And they'd help you try harder by put you in the corner, a dunce cap, they'd smack you a few times. If that didn't work, you're just very stupid. And that's the way of the world. Well, I was lucky. I had a first grade teacher by the name of Mrs. Eldridge, and she knew there was more to little boys and girls who couldn't learn to read than being stupid. And there are better ways to help them than humiliate them or punish them. Now, she had no formal training in reading that I know of, but she'd been teaching first grade for about 75 years. You know, she was this very short lady, very, very round, and little curly hair and spectacles. And reading period, she'd simply come over and sit down next to me. And it was back when old ladies used to wear a lot of powder. Remember that? So she'd sort of arrive like a sugar donut, you know, sprinkling these clumps, you know, and create this little, like one of those globes with snow for us to sit in, and she'd put her arm around me so there'd be her forearm there and my little head here and this enormous cushion right here. And she would hug me into that, and I would feel so safe. And as I would stammer and stutter when it came to be my turn to read, none of the other kids would laugh at me because I had the mafia sitting next to me, you know. And that was my treatment plan, was Mrs. Eldridge's arm. But it was amazing. I looked forward to reading period. And that's pretty incredible to take a 6-year-old little boy and have him look forward to publicly demonstrating his incompetence every day. But I looked forward to that hug. And without knowing it, I also looked forward to trying to learn to read. The part of my brain that had talent with words was allowed ever so slowly to inch its way out because there was no fear. There was no shame. What a difference that made. Now, by the end of the year, I was still the worst reader in the class. I was a child left behind, you know. My scores were rock bottom. But my enthusiasm was tip-top because of that arm. Now, to this day, I'm a painfully slow reader. I have dyslexia. That's the downside of dyslexia. But I majored in English at Harvard while doing pre-med and graduated with high honors and now make my living with words. That would never have happened had I had a different kind of first grade teacher. Never have happened. That woman changed my life forever, simply by putting her arm around me, simply by making it safe for me to have the brain I have. And this is so important as you raise your children. Advocate for them in school. Make sure they don't experience, I mean, they're going to have some of it, but what you can do is make sure they don't get overly humiliated, overly ridiculed, overly punished, and because that gets in. That gets in, and when it gets in, it's hard to get out. I mentioned David Nealman, my friend, and I told you how successful he's become. Well, I didn't tell you the bad part of the story, which is as he went through school, devout Mormon family, they were hoping he could do better, and he wasn't doing better. And when he dropped out, they were all very disappointed. And anyway, the day JetBlue went public, in a matter of hours, David made hundreds of millions of dollars. But he told me driving home that night, was I driving home to celebrate? He said, no, I felt like the same loser who couldn't hack it in school. That's what you want to avoid. That's what parents are so essential for, and teachers and coaches. What else goes into a connected childhood? Pets. You ought to have a pet. If you can have a pet, get a pet. Yes, pets produce poops, but pets are amazing teachers of connection. Have pets. Connection to groups, connection to teams, to clubs, to organizations, connection to the past, connection to favorite places, to nature, to activities, to any point of reference where positive energy goes back and forth. Some kind of spiritual connection. You don't have to be religious. We happen to be Episcopalian, but really the spiritual connection is the connection to what is beyond knowledge. The connection to what is beyond knowledge. It's not about memorizing dogma. One of my favorite lines is, Lord, help me always to search for the truth, but spare me the company of those who have found it. So you want to expose your kids in some framework, in some arena, to contemplation. And hopefully to celebration of life. That's what the spiritual connection should be about. Celebration and contemplation of mystery, of what we don't know. Well, as you raise your kids in this positive gamush, this marvelous force field of positive energy, they will naturally develop a positive connection to life and to self, And that becomes a reverberating circuit. I like me, I like life, I like me, I like life. And once that gets going, it's like a heart. It just beats automatically. And it's an incredible way to go through life. I was talking to Catherine earlier about my wife, and I said, Sue is happy. My wife just is happy every day. No matter what happens, she's happy. She's got that thing beating, and it's amazing. You don't have to love yourself. Just like yourself enough that you don't have to be a phony. Loving yourself is overrated. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people who love themselves who really shouldn't. So just like yourself enough that you can be real. Now, okay, that's the spinal column. Now I'm going to quickly take you through the next 4 steps. The connected child will naturally go to step 2, which is to play. And by play, I don't just mean what you do at recess. By play, I mean any activity in which your imagination lights up. Any activity in which your imagination. So, mud pies, incredible form of play. Blocks, great play. Silly putty, great place where you can get your hands into it. Conversation, great play. Marvelous way to instigate play, ask a question. That's play. Your imagination immediately gets involved. Where does the circle begin and end? Why did my brother have to get born? Questions initiate play. So you're always wanting with your kids to be playing. And reading aloud is play, because instead of being given the image as you are with screens, with words, you make your own images. Much more imaginative, much more imaginatively engaging. With words, you make your own. So instigate play wherever, whenever you possibly can. It's the greatest intellectual activity any of us ever does, and it's what we do really well. Unfortunately, a lot of education is the opposite. It's doing what you're told. It's robotic behavior. No, you want to be asking questions. You want to be instigating play. You want to be having them do projects, having them grow something. So then as you play, you find something you like to play over and over again. That's called practice. You see, work, you look at the adults who work really hard, you say, oh, they've got a great work ethic. No, they don't. They found something they really like to do so much, they keep doing it. People who work really hard do so because they want to. Believe me, they're not noble. They've just found some form of play that someone's willing to pay them to do. And they do it a lot. And so expose your kids to as much as you possibly can, and they'll find stuff that they love to do, that they'll work at, that they'll suffer for, going to the weight room or practicing scales or whatever it might happen to be. And then as you work at something, you get to step 4, which is you make progress. And making progress at something that matters to you, that's challenging, oh my God, that's pay dirt. That's where confidence comes from. That's where the growth mindset comes from. That's where self-regard comes from. That's where zest for life comes from. Making progress at something that is challenging, that matters to you. And that's where you need parents and coaches and teachers to help kids when they get frustrated, keep them moving. Mrs. Eldridge did not excuse me from reading. She expected me to keep trying. She just, with that arm, made it so that I would keep trying. You want them to keep trying. You want to challenge them. You don't want to coddle. You want to challenge them, absolutely, but in a context of connection. And then as they make progress, they will receive recognition, which not only consolidates all the good stuff that making progress laid down, but connects them to the wider group. And that's the root of moral behavior. We're also worried, how do we raise moral kids in such an immoral world? It comes back to connection. Kids who do the wrong thing usually do so because they feel dissed, overlooked, left out, mistreated, exploited. So if you want your child to have a moral sense, they don't have to memorize the 10 Commandments. What they need to do is feel recognized, feel a part of the larger group, ownership in the larger group, the family, the team, the school, the country, the world. That's where moral behavior comes from. There you have it, 5 steps. Connect, play, practice, work, make progress, receive recognition. That spins off all the attitudes that I told you predict, maximize the chances of a wonderful life. I'll give you one quick example of this process in motion, and then I'll stop. When my son Jack was in the 5th grade at the same school Catherine's kids went to, he found in our backyard a stray parakeet. I leave it to Jack, he finds a stray parakeet, brings it inside, says, "Look what I found out." I say, "Yeah, I see, you got a bird there." And he says, "His name is Paris." And I said, "How do you know his name is Paris?" He said, "That's his name." Like they had a conversation, you know. And I say, "Okay." So I go to Walgreens, buy a little bird cage, and put Paris in the cage, and figure Paris will probably die. No such luck. Paris lives. Jack goes to school, and he gets talking with the shop instructor, this wonderful woman who's on the lookout for kids with a special interest. And a few months go by, and he's lying in his bed, and he's got this big smile on his face. And I say, "Jack, what are you smiling about?" He says, my bird cage. And then a couple of more months go by, and he says, "Dad, you got to come to school today to pick up the bird cage." And I say, "Okay." And he says, "And bring the Suburban." You can stand in this bird cage. It's the biggest freaking bird cage I'd ever seen outside of a zoo, and it was just a monument to that year. It was never appear on a transcript, but boy, oh boy, can you see those 5 steps. Jack connected with the bird, fell in love with the bird. Then he connected with the shop instructor. And then the two of them started to play together. They imagined bird cages, and the instructor did what the adult can do and said, "Think big." And so he conceived of a much larger bird cage than he ever could have imagined. And his eyes widened. But this is a key moment, because if you say think big and it never happens, you become a cynic. If you say think big and it happens, you become an enthusiast. And it happened. He worked at it, he hammered, he nailed, he made progress, he received recognition. There it is. That's what growing up should be about. It should be about building bird cages. You build a few bird cages, or the metaphorical equivalent thereof, you fall in love with life. You fall in love with possibility. No matter how hard it is, you know you can. And so you keep trying, and you go from bird cage to bird cage to bird cage. And all these numbers that we think matter so much suddenly fade into the insignificant place they should fade into. And what emerges is this incredible channel of enthusiasm and love of life and desire to work and produce and grow and create. And that's what childhood should be about. Instilling that, creating that, which then becomes self-sustaining for the rest of your life. Well, thank you.